Tonight on Let's Talk About Sets, we have 3 TV heavyweights joining us in the studio: Patricia Edgar, Andrew May and Bruce Kane. Tonight they'll be sharing their knowledge with us to prepare us for our careers ahead.
Despite popular myth, the ABC sort of hadn't planned for youth television at all, and the then head of ABC television went on Triple J and was being interviewed and actually got slammed for not having a youth policy, and promptly came back to the ABC and decided there'd be a youth program created. And they had a very clumsy beginning, in as much as they'd chosen a program called Zone, and myself and my partner Paul Clark had been pitching a music and youth program for quite some time, and they'd taken this program and then turned around to us and said, well, fix it, make it something different. And out of that, gradually recovery came into being. My first job was on a program called Countdown Revolution, and I got a job as a writer on that, and that was terrible. It wasn't a successful show. There was Countdown, and they'd married that with a really great little program called Factory, if anyone's come across that at all. It was a great experience because it was such a dud, and I mean, from my perspective, I've never worked in television. I was sitting in meetings going, my God, what is happening? This feels so wrong. And I went from there on to another show that was even wronger, and that was horrible to watch your career, your first steps fall apart, but really informative as to perhaps what not to do in the future. An executive producer can be a very hands-off kind of approach. You can actually be quite involved creatively, and that really varies from show to show. The difference when you're working for a network is you're representing the broadcaster, and you're working with an independent, generally a producer, and you're working to get the best product. But most of the risk, and sometimes a lot more of the creative, sits on the producer's side. In the case of We Can Be Heroes and Summer Heights High, that was actually produced by Laura Waters. In that first season, We Can Be Heroes, there was a lot more involvement in that as the idea was forming, and there was a lot of nervousness over the concept. A hell of a lot of nervousness over that, and Chris was yet to be Chris Lilly, that is, a proven kind of commodity. So as a network EP, I was heavily involved in that. Summer Heights High, the script that Chris showed me, was the script that went to air. It was brilliant from the get-go, and you feel like a fifth wheel. You're really just going, great.
I actually studied engineering. Don't do it, people. And when I was at uni, there was a big movement of comedy sketch reviews, because the Oxford and Cambridge Review came to Melbourne Uni, and they had a lot of people looked at it and went, oh, we could do something as good as that, if not better. We had no connections. It was kind of trying. It wasn't necessarily luck. It was a bit of initiative in terms of that stuff. The connections will happen if you're there doing stuff, I think. Like, I wasn't friends with any of those TV people. I didn't know anybody. You just start, and I was doing stand-up a bit, so I got to know some of the comics. But generally, as you do stuff, you meet people, Well, we'd have a meeting with the writers, and usually came in with a few notes, and we'd sit around with the cast and writers and go, I've got a joke about, just a joke, I'd have a sketch about how it's about carpooling, and we'd go, how about this idea about carpooling so that it becomes like a tram? Oh, that's a good idea. So like the car becomes like a public transport. Oh, why don't you go and write that up, Andrew? That's a good idea. So I'd get with another writer and we'd write a sketch.
When I grew up, you didn't tell girls didn't have careers. What you did was aspire to get married, to have children and stop work. And the fact that I went to university was quite unusual from a small country town. I had always been an absolute film addict. Every Saturday I wanted to go to the movies. But my aspiration as a teenager was that I wanted to be an usherette, because I thought, well, then I can watch all the movies over and over and over. So that's how far I aspired. But I started studying film. I studied film production, television production, communication research, and writing. I really had a whale of a time. Everybody now really needs an understanding of the media and the way the media works. And you don't get that understanding, or you get it best by actually creating programs yourself.
Apart from Adam Hills being kind of a big show, and Hey Hey last year kind of being a big show, a lot of the comedies now are much smaller and produced by much smaller teams that don't necessarily hire in writers, because we're hired in for shows that had high turnover, a lot of sketches or a lot of live TV, so you had to come up with lots of ideas, whereas now we're going a bit more like with comedy, like the British comedy shows where you'll, like a Chris Lilly, it's like a drama series, but it's created by a very small group of people.
A lot of the networks, one in particular, is really overextended and has massive repayments to meet. They're not interested in those smaller daytime shows that used to be once part of the landscape. They demand big return and they risk a lot of money. In fact, you only need one or two of those to go to stiff on you, and the network can be in serious trouble. But so the focus is really there, and a lot of that, the smaller shows are just kind of periphery.
The ABC obviously had like a really, fertile ground where so many skills were developed in so many areas of production, and now there's an argument that because it's all outsourced, all drama and comedy production is outsourced, that this is going to lead to a skills shortage in the future.
Yeah, look, that's by the time I sort of got my first ongoing job there in '96, and by the time I'd got there, most of the training had gone. There used to be a structure where you would you could start in working in props, and you could end up as a director. In fact, that's where most of the folk came from. There was an ongoing career path for you there, and that had all finished. The training had sort of stopped in the mid-90s. So that skills base was, you were relying on other people around you, and thank God that they had it, because I suddenly found myself running a show not really knowing what I was doing, and I was fortunately surrounded by people who'd had the benefit of that experience.
Now, I was really opposed to ABC3. The government saw it as a good way to go along with the idea of having a kids channel as a driver for digital programming. They dressed it up with all this nonsense about how the audience was going to be seeing all these quality children's programs, and then they branded it and they turned it into something that looks like every children's network that you see everywhere. They wanted high volume, they wanted it cheap, and they wanted it next month. They were looking for stuff and expecting people to be able to come up with new ideas that were going to fit a formula to strip programming. I don't think it's a very positive thing for the future of children's programming, and it gives the ABC a sort of monopoly in the way they did not have before. Over children's programming. If you want to sell a children's program, where are you going to go? You've got to go to the ABC. They're going to say to you, well, if we really like that idea, we're going to own it, because then we can own the merchandise and we can flog it and we will make more money. And that is the way it works, unfortunately. They dress it up in the finest language, but it is rubbish.
I think those of you who are writing, and whether that be formats or scripts or whatever, that work is never ever wasted, and that's been true through my entire career. The more you write and develop your own stuff, or conceive it and just put it down on paper, computer, whatever, that I really firmly believe that it's never ever wasted. So rather than worrying and stressing too much about a career, just get your ideas down and develop it.